Buenos días, mi gente. Can you hear me? I want to begin by first saying that it is a real honor to walk into the space and to be greeted by my people from Detroit. Brooklyn has deep, deep love for Detroit, yes. For the People's Climate March of 2014, I was one of the organizers for a march of 400,000 people. And one of the reasons why we led with young people of color and we led with sunflowers was in solidarity with the city of Detroit that was fighting for water. And we wanted to send that message that this is a movement. And whatever happens in Detroit matters to people in Brooklyn, matters to people in the Bronx, matters to the city of Richmond, matters to all of us who are part of the climate justice movement. I want to thank Dorcetta Taylor. I met Dorcetta so many years ago. And I remember that she was talking about coral reefs, that I had always heard people talking about polar bears when they were talking about climate change. And I had never heard anybody just bring it home to the Caribbean, to where so many of our folks from the African diaspora live. I know I'm a little melanin challenged, but my people come from Haiti into Puerto Rico, and we just show up in a lot of different shades. But I am a woman of African and Indigenous ancestry, and we know that climate change is going to impact our people more than any other. And so we have to lead in this movement. So I want to thank her for inviting me here, because she did inspire me and really sort of reminded me that climate change was not something that belonged somewhere else, that it wasn't a conversation that belonged to the most privileged or belonged to the big greens. It was a conversation that really needed to be owned, led, and guided by the front line of the crisis. I had an opportunity today to meet with Paul Mohai, with Tony Reams, really been supported and had a great conversation with Sonia Joshi and with the students, and it has been a really rewarding and impactful day. And so I'm going to try to weave in some of the conversations that I had during the morning, some of the concerns that were raised, some of the questions that the students raised about how do you come into a community. And so I'm going to talk about those things. But first, I want to begin with saying that right now, as we are speaking, there is a ship from Greenpeace that we had these conversations with Greenpeace about. We told Greenpeace, well, you've got all of these toys, and this is your Batman moment. We want your toys. We want you to rappel off the Brooklyn Bridge and drop a Puerto Rican flag. We want your blimp. We want your ship. We want you to fill up the ship with non-GMO seeds, with water filters, with solar generators, with bicycles, with safety gear, and we want you to take that to Puerto Rico. We want helicopters hovering over that ship. We want all of the international community to know that this is an international crisis, that this is a humanitarian crisis, that Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States, and that we need these resources to do something big, to draw the kind of attention that this crisis demands. And Greenpeace said, yeah. And so they're on their way today with our folks, with our seeds, with our bicycles, and with big signs basically letting people know, like the shipping industry and this government, what we think they should be doing, including unions. And this message goes to unions too, like the AFC-CIO, who doesn't want the Jones Act to be lifted. We're going to be telling them what we think they should be doing with the Jones Act. So, because it's in the interest of justice. So let me begin with Brooklyn and UPROSE. UPROSE is Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization. We were founded in 1966. I did not found UPROSE. Sometimes people ask me that, and I always jokingly say that the Botox is good, but it's not that good. It was founded by Puerto Ricans who came up from Red Hook into Sunset Park. And I don't know if you all know that the oldest Puerto Rican community in the United States came into the United States in the 1800s through Red Hook in Brooklyn, when it was still under as a colony of Spain. So Puerto Ricans have been in the United States for a minute. And on the way over here, when I was being driven over here, I saw a window with the Puerto Rican flag in it, and I'm like, okay, this is what's up, okay?
You know, our people always have that flag, right? We have it everywhere. It's our little act of resistance against being part of a colony of the United States. So UPROSE is this grassroots, women of color led, intergenerational organization that has done quite a few things. It's small, it's grassroots. We've doubled the amount of open space. We've sent 4 young people to Antarctica, 2 to the North Pole. We hold the largest gathering of young people of color on climate change in the country. We specifically focus on young people of color because they have been left out of the climate change conversation. They are often hired and used as a backdrop to somebody else's agenda. You get them to hold signs, but they are not integrated into leadership. There are conferences where young people of color are brought in, but their leadership is not supported or developed. And their generation, young people of color, are the ones that are going to be most impacted. We also believe that leadership has to be intergenerational, that leadership is a continuum and you learn across the table from each other, that we can be effective, that we can be impactful, that we can be sharp, that we can be cutting edge, and that we can't be addressing the human rights issue of our day, which is climate change, unless we are working in a way that's intergenerational. This is a country that pits generations against each other. It's a country that does that because it's a country that's built on extraction. And a lot of folks here think that extraction really is about fossil fuel, about the dig, burn, and dump economy. And as a child of extraction, like my grandmother came from Puerto Rico after having lost half her children, 7 children, to hunger and disease because of extraction in Puerto Rico, because of US policies that moved her away from agricultural land to land that was being taken over by petrochemical industries. So I am a child of that. I am a child of extraction, a child of a descendant of slavery, a descendant of colonization. And so when I talk about extraction, I am not just talking about what we do to Mother Earth, what we do to the land. I'm also talking about our behavior. So in this country, generations are pitted against each other because younger people want to push older people out. You know, they want to do this because it's my turn. You had your time, and they push older people out. And older people want to hold on to power and not let young people in. So in traditions of African and Indigenous ancestry, we share power. We believe that we have to be at the table together. And this is a time and a historical moment that we're living in where that kind of sharing has to happen. But extraction doesn't only happen in terms of this intergenerational tension that exists in this country. It also happens with the nonprofit industrial complex and how big nonprofits basically helicopter into our communities, learn from us, take notes from us, try to shadow us, copy us, appropriate us, and then try to supplant local leadership, when in this time that we're living in, we need a different kind of rhythm, different kinds of relationships if we are going to address climate change. And so that's happened. That is happening right now. That is happening in Puerto Rico. That happened at the Paris Accords in 2014, when the big greens decided that they were going to marginalize the climate justice movement because we were the idealists, because we were saying that we were living in the age of climate change, and they put all their resources and all their support behind a Paris Accord agreement that had no teeth and basically didn't address any of the things that were happening in Bangladesh, in Yemen, in Brooklyn, in the wildfires in California, what happened in NOLA, what happened in the Gulf South, what just happened in Houston, what happened in Miami, and what just happened in Puerto Rico. These are things that our community has been preparing for. We are, after all, people that live within our carbon footprint. We are not the ones contributing to climate change, but we are the ones that are dealing with the brunt of the decisions made by the descendants who colonized us. And so that's where we are right now. So at the heart of all this, whether you are studying to be an engineer, whether you are an urban planner, a GIS mapper, whether you're a scientist that is looking at how do you balance reducing carbon, including co-pollutants and all the emissions that are basically killing the frontline communities, all of those skills that you have are meaningless if you don't know how to build just relationships, if you don't know how to engage in just transformation, if you're not willing to check your privilege and use it actually to support the grassroots, the front line, in determining what their priorities are. And so it is the biggest challenge, and I often talk about how privilege is the biggest challenge to climate change. People will talk about, well, it's capitalism, it's this, it's that, and I'm like, you know what? You bring a whole bunch of people together who you think are like-minded, who are aligned, who you think have your back, and then all of a sudden the hand goes up, the space is taken, and leadership is supplanted without any introspection about this. How do I better show up? What is climate change demanding of us personally in terms of what our relationship should be? How do I show up in the classroom, and how do I show up in community? How do I use these skills, this talent, this brilliance to basically support and not supplant? Because by 2042, we will be the majority in this country. And by 2042, climate change will have fully have taken a hold of us. And so can we continue to operate in the way that we have learned, that we have been conditioned to operate under these conditions? We have been conditioned to be competitive. We have not been taught how to collaborate with each other. We have been conditioned not to listen, to talk about how much we know, how smart we are. People, graduate students, call me on a regular basis. Can I pick your brain? No. Can I shadow you? No. I had a person who called the other day and said, listen, can you sit down and talk to me about this Climate Justice Youth Summit that you all do so that I can do the same thing? No, I can't. This is something that is led and organized by young people of color, and it is remarkable what they are able to do because everybody thinks that they're at risk. And I think they're at potential because I was them once, and we were them once. And so we understand what it's like to come from struggle and to basically manifest in our complete brilliance, right? So I think very differently about community, and I don't want a climate justice youth summit that is led by privileged people and our young people come in as passive recipients of somebody's good intentions. Because people don't just learn by reading, they learn by absorbing energy and watching, and they have to see themselves in leadership, and they have to see themselves leading the climate justice movement. And so these are things that are really important. And so the question is, what is the role that you will be playing in making sure that we are working in a way that is radically different than the way that we were conditioned to work with each other? Because that is what climate change is demanding of us. So in Sunset Park, we are doing things like trying to operationalize 4 different community-owned solar projects. One that is faith-based, one that is a semi-public business with MTA, another one in a business, and another one that is some local artists who bought some property in Sunset Park and wanted to know how they could help because they were coming in full gentrification mode. And we said, you know, now you got to pay for it with your rooftop. We want your rooftop. We want to put in community and solar. And they were like, okay, we'll do that. So we're trying to figure out, what does governance look like for that? And what does financing look like for that in a capitalist system? How do you create finance models to take people off the grid? And how do you create utilities that can be community owned? And how do we do that within a system that puts shackles on our ability to create local livable economies that move us away from extraction? So we're having those conversations, and in those conversations, you are absolutely necessary. A lot of us never studied economics. A lot of us are coming to this for the first time. I know that I've never taken an environmental policy class in my life. That basically I came to this work because people in the community said they're about to expand the Gowanus Expressway, and they're not asking us about that. And my children have asthma. And so we were like, oh, okay, so they've got to do an EIS. They have to do a draft environmental impact statement. We need to prepare the community for scoping. And so we go into the work because the community is telling us what the priorities are. Next, there is legislation being proposed that would make it possible for the community that is in a lead belt to have a remediation, and it's being fought by elected officials. So we get into that. After that, we find out that there's a proposal for a 520 megawatt power plant. So little by little, we were edging into this work without even knowing that it was called environmental justice. We were fighting police brutality and racial violence in Brooklyn. Remember, it was the Giuliani days. I'm still traumatized by that. And so we as a community don't have the luxury to choose between fighting against racial violence and police brutality and fighting for environmental justice. Our communities exist and struggle at the intersection of all those things. And so our community was basically telling us they're bringing a 520 megawatt power plant. It would be the size of 3 football fields. What do we do? So we learned all about it. And we defeated the siting of a 520 megawatt power plant, the only organization and the first to be able to do that in New York City. And they put up their signs and their notices. They did that around Thanksgiving, around Christmas. They had their hearing in a privileged neighborhood where our people were not allowed in to the hearing and we had to protest outside. All those things happened. We then doubled the amount of open space. We planted trees. We went from fighting against things to being proactive and reclaiming our spaces. We did that. We have a park now on the industrial waterfront. It's actually really beautiful and faces the Statue of Liberty and Lower Manhattan. We facilitated a community engagement process on a greenway design. And what happens after that? We were hooking up the neighborhood. It was looking amazing. That meant that developers then said, look how pretty that is. These people have been breathing this toxic air. They lead on asthma. They've got all kinds of respiratory disease. They've been struggling. They're reclaiming these neighborhoods. And now we can start promoting them for displacement. So there's no incentive for doing these things in a community of color, in a low-income community, because our struggle, our years, our sacrifice, the hours that we put in, engaging the community, mothers and fathers who have to go to meetings after school, who have 2 and 3 jobs, that have to, these are not people who have a nanny. These are people who are working class people. All of their work all of a sudden shows up in materials that are about promoting the community because the greenway is coming and there's all this open space, and look at the amazing things that we have. So that presents a challenge for those of us from the environmental justice movement, because all of a sudden the amenities that we've been able to get for people who long deserve them because of the health disparities become the vehicle for displacement in our communities. That becomes a real challenge for us. So we are in that space where we are fighting now a business owned by Jamestown on our industrial waterfront, Industry City, the largest significant maritime industrial area in New York City, a space that we think could be used for building for climate adaptation and mitigation, and is being commercialized. And just a few days ago, if you follow us on Twitter, you'll see that we're basically saying don't crush Brooklyn, because Brooklyn Crush had this huge event where thousands of people who were bored with Williamsburg and Chelsea in New York City descended in for their artisanal toast, their avocado sandwiches, and their wine. In Sunset Park, we sell the largest, the most expensive cup of coffee in the country, $18 a cup. And we've got these 2 Italian guys who went to Mexico and discovered avocados. They actually said this. The New York Times said it, so it must be true. And they opened the first avocado bar in the United States. Oh my God. In a community where it is largely Latino, Caribbean, and Mexican, they discovered avocados. And so while they're discovering avocados and selling $18 cups of coffee and repurposing the industrial waterfront that can be building for climate adaptation and mitigation, that prevents us from addressing things like bringing offshore wind into New York, bringing in community-owned solar, changing procurement policies that would make it possible for us to take street infrastructure and make it run by solar and wind, so that in the event of an extreme weather event, our community of 130,000 people won't go dark. So we are very solution-oriented, and these corporate interests are preventing us from being able to do what we have to do locally. But they're the same corporate interests, by the way, that are planning things throughout all of New York City and that are engaged in the fossil fuel industry, right? And they're the same ones that are being supported by people like Mayor de Blasio, these progressive politicians that supposedly care about the most poor, the most vulnerable in our communities, but are basically supporting these kinds of businesses in New York City. So this is important because these stories repeat themselves everywhere. This is not unique to Brooklyn or to Sunset Park. This is happening in Detroit. It's happening in Chicago. It's happening in the Bay. It is happening everywhere. And what does this mean when we're talking about displacement and you're talking about gentrification and you're talking about the inability for us to build for a climate future that is already here? It means that we are so far behind, and what is keeping us from getting to the place that we have to get? The fact that we are conditioned to consume, to take. You know, I remember I had a professor in law school who said to me, and this is a long time ago, I'm not going to tell you, but she said, the future of civil rights is in property law. And I said, what do you mean by that? She goes, this country was built on taking, and it's all about taking. It's all about the land. So I don't know where our communities are moving to, and I know that people who come in to have a conversation about climate change don't want to hear about gentrification and displacement. But if you don't want to hear about that, then you don't understand the intersectionality of climate justice. You don't know that we exist, we fight, we breathe, we live at the intersection of racial justice and climate change. And that's where we are. We, as I mentioned earlier, don't get to choose between one or the other. So our struggles are completely interconnected. Our communities don't exist in silos. And so the solutions can't exist in silos. You can't work in silos. You have to work in a way that is interdisciplinary. When there is a crisis like there was in Katrina, you couldn't just have EPA come in. You needed the Department of Energy, the Department of Labor. You needed the Department of Health Services. All of those things had to come in because we exist in our complexity, and those problems are made further by the fact that we are the descendants of extraction. Our legacy is that. And so that's what's happening in Puerto Rico, right? The disaster capitalism. We have so much to learn from what happened to our people in the Gulf South. So I'm co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance. And the Climate Justice Alliance is a national alliance, and there's some members here, right? Ooh. Yeah, so we got some members here. And much love to EMIAC. I was really happy to see you in the audience. So the Climate Justice Alliance is an alliance of frontline organizations all over the United States that are trying to move our communities away from extraction to just transitions, to local livable economies that basically move us towards sovereignty. And that is actually the vision for Puerto Rico too. We're calling it a just recovery to move Puerto Rico away from its dependency on the United States and to basically move us towards sovereignty, give Puerto Rico all of the tools and everything that Puerto Rico needs so that it can actually start fending for itself. So resiliency, just want to say something about that because some of the students talked about resiliency. UPROSE has what's called a Climate Justice Center after Sandy. We were asked to do, literally the community came in and said, I want to do more than change the light bulb. I want you to help me learn how to do other things that address climate change. And so the Climate Justice Center was built because of that. And the problem with the word resiliency is that it means bouncing back. And we can't go back. We can't go back to injustice, to police profiling and racial violence. We can't go back to any of that, to discrimination, to racism, to exclusion. We have to be able to move forward to being stronger, to living within our carbon footprint, to creating economies of scale that address the needs of local communities, to building a just society. We have to move forward. So we use the word resistance instead of the word resiliency because the word resiliency, unfortunately, and we know, when we think resiliency, we basically are talking about our strength, right? The fact that we're strong people. But we don't want to be strong like that. We don't want to be strong, basically living and reliving things that have happened to our ancestors and to the people behind us. We really want to be strong to build a society and a future that we envision, that we imagine, just like the people behind us or before us imagined a society that made it possible for me to be here with you today. So that's what we want. We want to be able to imagine that. And imagining that can't be anything like we've known before. And knowing that it can't be like anything we've known before really requires also imagining what is my role, what is my place, How do I build with people in a way that I have never developed the skills to do? How do I do that differently? How do I take that risk? And climate change, if you don't take the risk, climate change is going to do that for you. If you're not willing to step into it, climate change will take care of that for you because we are living in the age of climate change. So I have to take risks. I have to name names. I have to call people out. I have to have uncomfortable conversations. I have to do the things that nobody wants to do. And I do. I call people out all the time. Right now in New York City, there is a problem with disaster capitalists descending into Puerto Rico with celebrity in tow, right? And I have to name it because what's at risk is the life of people, our survivability. And so what does it cost me? What does it cost UPROSE? It costs us funding. It costs us doors to get closed. It's that crazy Puerto Rican woman. My God, she's just not elegant. I think I'm elegant. There's a saying from Tego Calderon. He says, calle pero elegante. Anybody know Tego? How many Puerto Ricans in here? Oh, I'm so happy to see you. I don't have my glasses on, but I feel you. So you know Tego says calle pero elegante, right? So somos calle pero elegante. That means street, but elegant. And so yeah, not elegant enough. All of the sort of the words that are used to put us in our place and places that we refuse and will not be in, right? So all of these things are really important when you're addressing this. And so right now, let me just tell you a little bit about Puerto Rico and some of the things that are happening there and what we want for Puerto Rico. Let me just pull this up on my phone. Okay, so what we're looking for, so you know that what we understand is that over 1,000 people have died and that there's a media blackout on Puerto Rico. We have, I know that several of my friends, I'd say like about 3 or 4 of them have buried their elders in the backyard because there was no refrigeration, no electricity, and so they had to bury them themselves in the backyard. I know that a lot of folks are sick, that a cousin of mine called to say that she's been 8 weeks without any electricity, that there are still people without water, that children are drinking contaminated water, that 23 Superfunds have literally like spilled all over everything, that the air is yellow from the diesel, from the generators. Puerto Ricans, I don't know if you know this, have one of the highest asthma levels in the world. My father died from an asthma attack at the age of 52. My mother has asthma. I had a bilateral pulmonary embolism just a few years ago, literally got to the hospital with about 5 minutes to go. I don't smoke, I don't drink. I just was born and raised in an environmental justice community and work and struggle in environmental justice communities. So they have, the air is yellow, over 1,000 people have died, 1 million people still don't have electricity, something like 60% of Puerto Rico still doesn't have electricity. And over 100,000 people have already left. And the feeling is that the island is being emptied, and it's being emptied so that it can be privatized. That what they're doing to Puerto Rico is what they did to the people in New Orleans who never came back, to communities that were historical Black communities, where there are now all kinds of transportation amenities and all kinds of infrastructure and beautiful things that didn't exist for the people who struggled, who gave their lives, who had slave ancestors. They didn't get those things, and they were pushed out. But now the pioneers are here. And so now they've got all of these cool things, and they are able to invest in infrastructure for other people that have displaced Black people in New Orleans. So in Puerto Rico, there are conversations being had about entire towns that they want to privatize. You've got then also the Big Greens, right? You know what the Big Greens said? They had a conversation, all of them got together, just like they had a conversation at the Paris Accords about what they were going to do with us. They also had a conversation about Puerto Rico. In their wisdom, they had a meeting to discuss what to do with Puerto Rico without a single Puerto Rican in the room. And so when I talk about just relationships and the Jiménez principles for democratic organizing, because that's what I'm referencing, when I talk about that, and I talk about how we have to build a different kind of society if we're going to address climate change, I also feel and want you to know that if you're part of that, if you're part of one of those people in the room determining the future of the global South, if you are descending into communities of color to determine what's in our best interests, then when the extreme weather events happen, when our people are not able to lead, when our people are not able to create or operationalize just transitions, whatever happens to us, you're responsible for. You are responsible to what happens to us. Not the right, we don't even talk to them. I'm not having a conversation with climate deniers, they're just a waste of time. No conversation, no time for that, no rhythm for it. But the folks that are supposed to be aligned with us, the folks that are supposed to be taking our backs, the folks that are supposed to be honoring their descendants in the Underground Railroad, those folks, if they don't know how to come into a space in a way that honors that honors just relationships, that honors self-determination, then I think that they hold the responsibility. And the big greens who are now descending because they see our disaster, our pain, as an opportunity for them, with the understanding that the Climate Justice Alliance is going in. We're going in, and the way that we're going in is not, we didn't all sit down in a room and decide, okay, let's talk about what's in the best interest of Puerto Rico. No, we called the people on the island. Listen, I am Puerto Rican, born and raised in New York City. And you know, if any of you from urban places, anybody put your hands up if you're from urban places. Hi. Okay, put one of my glasses. Okay, let's see. Okay, so you know that if you're from Chicago, if you're from Detroit, if you're from Miami, if you're from California, that it doesn't matter where you live, there's going to be a Puerto Rican flag in the window, right? What that means, and that may not seem significant, but for us, it's our act of defiance. It's a reminder that we belong somewhere, that it may not be a nation, that it may be a colony, but that that's where we're from. That we have not accepted the fact that this is our country because we are second-class citizens here, because we basically grew up in Black communities that anchored us, that literally were like this with us. That's our history with the Black community in New York City, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, in Chicago, everywhere with the Black communities. I think we grew up understanding that anything we had, anything that we were able to accomplish, we owed that to the Black community, that we owed the fact that we had rights to the Black community. I'm not certain that a lot of folks of color understand the role that the Black community has played in their liberation, and the fact that they can get jobs, and the fact that they can be in this classroom, the fact that they can actually walk through the streets safely. They owe that to the Black community in this country. And the Puerto Rican community has always known that. We've always known that despite being melanin challenged, some of us, that we are Black people. And so what is happening in Puerto Rico becomes for us a model of how a nation of people of African and Indigenous ancestry comes back from colonization, comes back from extraction, comes back operationalizing just transitions, moves towards food sovereignty, creates local livable systems that actually may help them embrace sovereignty and understand that they don't need the United States, but also becomes a model that can be replicated throughout the Caribbean and throughout the global South. Because if it can happen in Puerto Rico, then definitely the global South can benefit from that, because Puerto Ricans depend almost entirely on the United States. 80% of the food in Puerto Rico comes from the United States. And the other 20%, that agricultural land was just devastated by Maria. So when we're thinking about the solutions for Puerto Rico, we're thinking we have to emphasize the importance of input in the recovery process by local impacted communities. And so CJA has been working really closely with the folks on the ground to tell us, what are the priorities, what do you need? So on the ship, we sent non-GMO seeds, we sent solar generators, we sent bicycles and bicycle repair kits, we sent water filtration packages, we sent tarps, we sent all of the things that people asked us for so that they could rebuild on their own. Ensuring public participation in an open and transparent oversight process. We're really, really concerned that when US agencies show up and corporations show up, that the emphasis on the rebuild is going to be in the places where the United States has economic interests, and that there are entire towns and parts of Puerto Rico that are going to be neglected. Promoting long-term economic development, environmental safeguards, and the rights of local communities affected to chart their own path to recovery. Right now, the solutions are very top-down. FEMA is basically, unlike in other parts of the country where FEMA actually provides support, FEMA is encouraging Puerto Ricans to leave. They've never done that anywhere in the United States. Puerto Ricans, for example, who are pro-statehood are now really rethinking that because they just found out, it finally hit them in a real hard way, what it means to be a Puerto Rican citizen in the United States. Maintaining labor protections and the National Environmental Public Policy Act and other legal protections. Labor is a real problem. We've got SEIU with hubs all over Puerto Rico, and we're concerned that they're going to be bringing in workers from other places instead of hiring Puerto Ricans nationally, because the unemployment rate in Puerto Rico was about 60% before Maria. And so we know what happens in New Orleans. We know that Black people were not hired to rebuild their own communities, that workers were brought in from the outside. And so we're basically talking to labor and saying the employees, the people have to come from the base. Mitigating the causes of climate change by decreasing or eliminating dependency on fossil fuel. 23 brownfields in that tiny island. Have any of you ever been there? It's really tiny. And there are 23 Superfunds in Puerto Rico. So these are some of the things that we're looking at. We're also really concerned about some businesses like Tesla coming in and trying to invest in green infrastructure without having a conversation with people in Puerto Rico about what that should look like. And so there are a lot of concerns. And so Puerto Rico, and then there's food sovereignty. I don't come from the food justice movement. I just know that it is an integral part of the climate justice movement, and that we have met with tons of farmers in Puerto Rico that want us, instead of giving them money to basically grow their organizations, want money to buy the land. They just want to buy the land. They want to repatriate Puerto Rico. They want to buy the land because people are coming in and already speculating about the land. You're in a meeting, you're in a bus, you're in public transit, and you're hearing people talking about, maybe I can buy some land in Puerto Rico right now. That's how people in this country think. That's how disaster capitalists think. And so that kind of thinking, that extraction, that abusing people who are in dire need, really talks about the values, the core values of folks in this country. And not just in this country, in Puerto Rico too, we've got the Hispanics, right? I call them the Hispanics. Those folks, like the ones that are heading into Puerto Rico right now, who they're using the language of sustainability. They have a little green patina on it, but they're being led by celebrity, and they're coming in because they're the ones who supported Promesa. They're the ones who supported the hedge funds, and they're trying to create openings, green openings, for hedge funds to further privatize the island. So it's really painful. It's really painful to come from there and to have been born here and to have to be a second-class citizen here where I'm fighting for climate justice. It feels like my worlds collided as a climate justice activist and as a Puerto Rican. I've gotten a lot of phone calls from people who, even while Puerto Rico is happening, and that's happening, people are calling so that I can help them with their struggles, with their actions, with their mobilizations. I've become deeply, deeply Puerto Rican in the last few weeks. So I kind of feel that when people call me and they want to talk to me about DACA or they want to talk to me about ISIS, I want to ask them about Puerto Rico. Listen, we need your support. You're a social justice organization. Can you sign this? I said, did you sign the petition on relief, on debt relief in Puerto Rico on the Jones Act? No, sorry, I can't sign your petition. Literally, I am saying that to people because Puerto Ricans have been there. They've been there for movements for Black Lives, for the Muslim ban. Every protest, every action, Puerto Ricans have always stood up for justice. It's their history. It's our history. Think about what we look like. We're a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We're like sancocho, right? All good, delicious, right? But we literally feel people of different ancestries and have always stood up for justice. And in this moment, where literally we've got children drinking from water from hazardous waste sites, people are not stepping up for Puerto Rico. And so I am feeling a little narrow nationalism. I'm saying, you know what? I'm going to take care of everybody, but I'm going to take care of Puerto Rico first. And I'm going to do that in the interest of justice. And I expect a lot from other movements. I expect that they stand up, that they take our back, and certainly the Climate Justice Alliance is doing that in a really big way. And I'm really deeply grateful for how the Climate Justice Alliance, Why Hunger, Grassroots International, Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, Greenpeace, The Leap with Naomi Klein, all of these people have come together to support what we call the Our Power Puerto Rico campaign. It's a just recovery campaign, and that gives me hope. The other thing that gives me hope is that people in this country have donated tons of money to Puerto Rico, not money, tons of supplies to Puerto Rico. They're sitting there in the port, and the United States is not letting people have access to that food because I think it's genocide. They drop food, water, medicine, and supplies all over the world where there's a crisis, but they can't bring a helicopter to do that in Puerto Rico. So it really raises the values and the ethics of this country, that is exactly what's happening there. So the people that have left Puerto Rico are climate refugees, and they're heading our way. They're coming all over the United States. And we're trying to discourage them from leaving, but how do you tell a mother with a child who's sick that she can't leave to get the care that her child deserves? You can't do that unless you're living it, and as a parent, it's not our place to do that. So that's where we are in Puerto Rico, and here in the United States, where we are is building a movement, community by community, door by door, using all of our tools, social media. Somebody asked me earlier today, you do all that on Twitter? I'm like, yeah, we use Twitter because policy wonks, the press, and elected officials get pissed, and they pay attention to Twitter. So we use Twitter for that. We use Facebook for community, and we door knock for people who don't have access to social media. We use all of our tools. And you are part of our toolbox. You're part of our toolbox because you have access to very specific areas of expertise that are necessary for addressing the complexity of climate change. And so you are welcomed to be part of this movement, but what is necessary is that you check out the Jiménez Principles for Democratic Organizing, that you walk in correct, and then we welcome you with open arms, because basically what we want to do is build a movement. And we want to build a movement that looks like this room. But we don't want a movement that we basically sit on the back of the bus on. I think that time is over. And so I hope that you take that to heart, because it's coming from my heart. And that the other thing that I want to mention, and I forgot, is when I talk about being intersectional and being interdisciplinary, you also have to think about the arts. We use the arts to basically lift the local narrative, and art is an extremely important part of the work that we're doing locally and that we're doing throughout the country. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to take questions from you. I'm going to put on my glasses to see if I can see your faces, but gracias de corazón.